Hi everyone. This week we're going to be discussing microaggressions in the classroom. This is not in our book, however, I do feel that this is a very important topic that we need to discuss in multiculturalism in the classroom. So before we begin, we need to discuss the terminology. What exactly is a microaggression? Well, the definition is a brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignity, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults toward people of color. Now, I think we can all think back to a time where we have said something that was pretty dumb. And maybe we didn't mean it, or maybe when it came out, you realize, oof, I shouldn't have said that. And that could potentially be a microaggression. Sometimes we say things aggressively, or we mean to, but most of the times I find that folks, when they learn about microaggressions, realize that they may have accidentally committed this at one point. One example here is this character wearing a hijab and someone asking where you were born, or saying you were born in Canada, thinking that because this individual covers herself up, that maybe she was from another country. Another one may be, you have a mental disability? You seem perfectly normal to me, which is one not very nice thing to say, but again, is a microaggression, because just because we don't see your disability does not mean that you don't have it. Other terms you should familiarize yourself with for this topic include microassaults. Those are conscious and intentional actions or slurs, such as using racial epithets or deliberately serving a white person before a person of color in a restaurant. There's microinsults. These are verbal or nonverbal communications that subtly convey rudeness and insensitivity and demean a person's racial heritage or identity. A microinsult could be as simple as you getting on an elevator or escalator with somebody and clutching your purse tightly to yourself if you carry a purse or a bag. Or maybe it's you locking your doors when you're driving through a particular neighborhood, not because of safety issues, but because you associate particular racial groups with safety. So if you're driving through a neighborhood that is more Hispanic than white, or more Black than white, and you lock your doors. And then there's microinvalidations. These are communications that subtly exclude, negate, or nullify the thoughts, feelings, or experiential reality of a person of color. So some of these things can be considered, like this individual here who is sexually ambiguous is holding up a sign that says, "Are you a man or a woman?" I mean, does it matter? Or you might make a comment about someone's sexuality. "Oh, I didn't know you were gay." I mean, does it matter if you're gay or not in any social context? It shouldn't. Another one would be, "You natives don't have to work. Doesn't the government give you everything for free?" That is quite insulting. So please be aware of this terminology. And these slight comments can be about socioeconomic status, disability, gender expression or identity, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, nationality, and religions. And these insults or insensitivities, they may be exhibited by students or adults within the school community. So you see here I have a picture of PC Principal. If you're a South Park fan, then you know who PC Principal is. And you're more than welcome to YouTube a few episodes of South Park to see who I'm talking about. But we live in a very interesting time now where you might say something that has absolutely no meaning that would be insulting, but because we are all about political correctness, someone may take it as an insult or an aggression. And what I'd like to say to you is this. If you say something and someone takes it as an insult or aggression, you need to understand that you haven't lived a day in that individual's shoes. And you really need to consider how we say things and what we say to one another, particularly to our students and to our coworkers, to ensure that we have an equitable learning space. So here is a beautiful video about students experiencing microaggressions.
Think about a time when someone said something about some aspect of your identity that made you feel insulted or slighted. Even if they didn't intend it, you probably experienced a microaggression.
A microaggression is something that someone says to someone else without knowing that it may be offensive. It hurts. So that's how I know it's a microaggression, because it feels disrespectful.
And it's not like outright racism, but it's something that is like almost unconscious in the way that you view people.
Most microaggressions are subtle and indirect, but they occur frequently in the daily interactions of members of historically underrepresented groups. And most often, people who commit microaggressions think of themselves as well-intentioned, non-racist, non-sexist people. They do not realize that the underlying messages communicated by their actions or comments are hurtful to other people.
One of my friends asked if my parents had their papers.
I had a science teacher, a physics teacher, and he told me that I was the smartest black girl in his class. I've been asked if I understood what they were talking about, or do you need any translation and stuff just based on my name?
I'm not the spokesperson for the whole black community, but that's a microaggression I do experience a lot. Like, they want the black perspective, and I'm usually the only black girl in the class. So it's like, okay, what's your take on this?
Oftentimes I get asked, do you know how to speak your native language? And when I answer I do, it's just they're like, okay, well, what does chinchao mean?
There are 3 types of microaggressions: microassaults, microinsults, and microinvalidations. A microassault is similar to what we think of as overt discrimination. In the case of microassaults, those acts are intentional.
I was a server for a long time, and if anyone else was, you know this. In the back of the kitchen, when someone gets a table of, say, Indian people, I hope this is PC, I don't know all the terms, but Indian people or black people or anyone, they'd be like, who wants that table? I don't want it, they're not going to tip. And my heart would break every time.
I used to be a server too, and I hated it because I was the only person of any type of race other than white. I remember coming in and they'd be like, "Oh, Danielle, you get that table of raccoons," and I was like, "What?" And they were like, "Yeah." Then I would go and I'm like, "They're black people," and I was like, "Wait, is that what you call black people? You call them raccoons?"
A microassault can be the deliberate posting of swastikas, Confederate flags, racial slurs or epithets that are left on a blackboard in a classroom.
I work as a research assistant, and so a while ago, one of the new RAs, when I was a few months into it, came up to me and just mentioned that even though we'd known each other for months at that point, you're the least scary black guy I've ever met. In the way that I dress, the way that I talk, the way that I speak. I've kind of tailored that over the course of my education to be non-threatening.
I will literally have my keys in my hand, they're always with me, and I'll just jingle them as I'm walking so that they know that I know that I'm there, so that we both know that I'm right here and I'm not going to try and do anything be stupid. But on that note, there's also the stigma that we're aggressive and intimidating.
It's sad you have to make sure you let people know you're not a threat, and that's jacked up.
One of my friends commented to me. He said, I don't really even think you're black. You're, and I was like, what? I was like, what do you mean? He's like, you're smart. You do your work. Yes, you're athletic, but you do your work. You're smart. So I don't really know if you're black. I was like, I didn't understand. It made me question who I was and if I was still a part of the culture.
And that's an example of micro-invalidation and a micro-insult. And I'm going to talk about those a little bit more. A micro-insult is a comment that communicates the demographic group is not respected, that person is a slight exception to the stereotype. It's an insult, even though the perpetrator thinks he has just rendered a compliment.
Well, here at UNC, I've heard, you're so pretty for a black girl. I feel like it discounts me as a person, and then I feel like it discounts my race. I feel like you can be pretty just because you're a woman, or all black women are beautiful, all people of color are beautiful. just the same as people that are not people of color. So for them to make that specific statement, that's what I'm like, what in you made you say that to me? As if it were a compliment.
So another type of micro insult is when students in the classroom are dismissed or treated almost as if they're invisible. For instance, in some of our sciences or engineering classes, there are few women, and professors often don't call on those women.
I had one instance in a statistics-based class where we were discussing something bell curve related, and he presented a question, and I don't remember exactly what the answer was, but I answered it, and he kind of doubted me, and he very condescendingly was just like, oh, okay, well, I mean, like, this is the best answer, but I guess your answer could be right. You know what, we'll ask, it was a grad student, he was like, you know what, we'll ask Dr. So-and-so and see what he thinks the best answer is. And there was no apology or anything. He was just like, oh yeah, Dr. So-and-so said that, yeah, that was actually a really acceptable answer. And I was just like, okay. What else is he going to doubt me on, and when else am I going to be called out in front of 70 other people, you know, and have a weird exchange that makes the whole room quiet? Like,
one of my science classes, my teacher had asked what I wanted to do, and I told the teacher that I wanted to be a psychiatrist, and immediately they're like, that's too hard for you, maybe you should try a different field, or have you ever thought about being a nurse practitioner? Nurse practitioners in psychiatry make pretty well, they make a lot of money too. Have you thought about that? Like, why go to med school? Genuinely, sometimes somebody might feel like they can't make it, you know, and then you continue to tell them that, it does hurt, you know.
I've had a lot of professors tell me to my face that they were surprised that I was as good as a student as I was, and that I paid attention in class and actually participated. And when I asked why, they said, well, you know, you just come off as a troublemaker. You have all these piercings and short hair as a girl and tattoos, and we just naturally assumed that you weren't really going to be any good.
Another type of micro insult is when a professor says to a student, wow, you speak really good English. The message is, the professor thinks I don't really belong here, or that I'm not really American. Of course I speak good English. I'm born in the United States. But the professor sees a Latina or an Asian and makes the assumption that that person is foreign, or at least that is what the target hears. What is the underlying message when somebody asks if you're legal?
That you don't belong to this country.
That you don't belong. That's right.
We were walking in the gym once, and I was a guest, so I had to hand the person my ID. And he was looking at my name and everything. He's like, what are you? And I was like, well, what are you asking? He's like, what nationality are you? I was like, okay, I'm Lebanese, I'm Arab.
He's like, you got one of those that blow things up, are you? No offense, though. What kind of crazy stuff?
Yeah.
You ask someone, you get what I'm saying?
And I was just really surprised. Like, it totally blew my mind that someone would think that.
The assumptions I get the most is that I'm very academic and that I'm very good at math. When they assume stuff like that, it makes me feel like they're taking the individual out of who I am and just assuming that all the people who look like me act like me, and that kind of makes me feel lesser of what I can do.
The teacher was asking if someone could translate something in Spanish, because he was giving an example, and he needed this one word to be translated in Spanish. And he just stared at me specifically when he was asking, and I knew we were making eye contact, because after, I just stayed quiet, because I was like, I'm pretty sure there's other people in this class that know Spanish, but he just kept staring at me, and at some point, the rest of the class turned to look at me, waiting for a response, and I was like, I'm not going to give you guys an answer, this is not okay.
Our teacher pulled me aside because they were doing something for Christmas, like Toys for Tots or something, and he had this bicycle. They had a bicycle they were going to give to the kids, and he came up to me and was like, "Hey, I need to switch out the seats on this bike, and it seems like somebody like you would know how to do that." So if you could just change it out for me, that'd be great. And so I was like, oh, okay, sure, not really thinking much of it. And then later on, I kind of thought to myself, that's odd. Why would he assume that I knew personally how to switch, bike seat? So I thought that was an odd kind of maybe a micro insult on the fact that he assumed just because maybe I'm Latino that I'm good with my hands or something.
A microinvalidation is a comment or action that dismisses the experiences of historically disadvantaged group members. Microinvalidations can happen when, for instance, when a student is lamenting that she wishes there were more Latina faculty, for instance, and the students in the class start rolling their eyes or, oh, come on, get over it, and the professor goes along with the students instead of with the person who made the lament. Another type of microinvalidation, one that we hear a lot about today, is being colorblind. When people say, I don't notice you're black, I don't notice you're Latina, I don't see color. What does that mean? How do you interpret that? What are people saying when they say, I don't notice your race, I don't see color? How do you interpret that?
That they don't look at that side of you and they just want to validate you as a person, but it comes off wrong because it's like your race is very much who you are as an individual.
In a lot of my mini classes, I have to do writings, and it's just professors seem to be like don't want to hurt my feelings because I'm an international student, so mine is not that good, especially with my writing. So they let me go easy, I just feel like they have different expectations for international student and just American students. And like a lot of feedback that I get from like my writings is just like not really meaningful, because I just feel like they just try not to hurt my feelings, try to go easy on me, but then by doing that I just feel like it takes toll on my development, like my learning, my writing, and art stuff.
So what do you do if you are not the person who commits the microaggression as the professor? What if someone else in the classroom commits it?
What I usually do is I name it. When I hear it in the room, a microaggression that a student says, it may not be directed to a particular student, but there are probably students in the room who will feel as if they have been microaggressed against. I will name that I think we've just had a difficult comment made that not everybody's comfortable with. What are people feeling in the room right now? Did anyone feel uncomfortable with that? And then if there's silence, which there oftentimes is because people are uncomfortable about calling each other on things, I will talk about what it is that I heard. I will model the behavior of instigating a difficult dialogue. And usually once I do that, then people will come back.
The impact on students that can be harmful is that it creates an uncomfortable environment or climate. It can be very stressful. Some of the research shows that it can affect people's health because of the stress. But I think one of the big things is that you just don't feel like you belong or are included. And, especially when we're trying to create a campus where diversity is valued and where everybody feels included, they get in the way of that goal.
Just recently, I caught myself making one. And as soon as the words came out of my mouth, I realized that I had made this exact mistake that I was just talking about, like overgeneralizing to an entire group or class of people. And I saw tears well up in her eyes. And I said, I'm so sorry. I'm absolutely positive that I have said something to hurt you. And I think I know why. But I would really like to hear from your perspective what just happened here.
So common microaggressions committed by faculty in the classroom include the following: mispronouncing students' names after they have repeatedly corrected you, referring to students by the wrong pronouns, calling on men while ignoring women in class discussions, or calling only on white students and ignoring the students of color in your classroom. Scheduling tests or projects during religious or cultural holidays, Be aware of assigning projects.
So racial microaggressions, they create a hostile and invalidating climate for people of color. It saps their spiritual and psychic energy, and their cumulative nature can result in depression, frustration, anger, rage, loss of self-esteem, anxiety, etc. You, as teachers, you add so much value to your students' lives. You see them more than they normally get to see their own families when you see them 8 hours a day. And so it really is important that we consider, how do we speak to our students, and how do we allow our students to speak to each other, at least in your own classroom. You may not be able to control what they're saying to each other online or in the gym locker rooms or in the halls, but you do have the responsibility to model the best behavior for treating everyone equally in the classroom. So if you experience microaggressions, what should you do? And I think that this is a lesson that we can teach our students as well. First off, you need to assess the situation. You need to find a way to pause from assuming or reacting right away. If it's the first time and the incident is new, you could ask the person to repeat what he or she said or did. If you're the one that committed the microaggression, you need to take a pause too and really consider what's happening. I know some of us were really good at the diarrhea of the mouth, or when something dumb comes out of your mouth, you just can't stop talking. And this is the moment where we just need to take a pause. Your first concern must be that you are safe from physical, emotional, and psychic abuse of any kind. So before you address the situation, you really need to consider your safety or your student's safety before moving on. Then you need to ask the following: what kind of risk will I be taking if I do this? If you address this, what kind of risk are you taking? Is this particular action worth my time and effort? And do I know what I want to achieve? You really need to think about, what is the outcome that you want to come out of this? For example, if someone says something really dumb to you about your race, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, where you are socioeconomically, and it's a generalization, this may be a beautiful learning opportunity. You could teach them something specific about your culture, your ethnicity, your race. However, if this person is coming at you aggressively and you don't see them backing down, you need to consider, what risk are you taking if you address this? Are you in a safe space to do this? Is this person willing to be open and learn something new? Step 3 is you need to model the behavior. Always model the behavior you want from the person or people you are confronting. So that would mean, if you don't want to get screamed at, you can't scream at them. It's also a good idea to stay away from things like sarcasm, snide, mocking, or arrogant comments, even though I understand that this can be very tempting. So if you are going to address this, I understand that you probably want to use humor to diffuse a situation. However, humor might end up being misconstrued, same with sarcasm, and no one wants to be mocked at or felt dumb or stupid. Again, the goal here is education. If it's not about winning a point or making someone feel bad or wrong, it's about helping them understand something from a different perspective. I think something you really need to understand is that minorities are constantly put under a microscope. For many of us, we are the only one that you know. And so we have to set a model behavior so that you don't make assumptions that all lesbians are a certain way, all Black people are a certain way, all Jews or Muslims are a certain way, particularly if you only have met one or two in your entire life. And so you need to consider the pressure that these individuals are under as well. So let's recap real quick. If you yourself end up experiencing a microaggression, a microinsult, or microassault, think about focusing on the actual event and not on the person saying or doing the insult. That will help you diffuse the situation much faster. Please stay calm. Discuss how you learn about various cultures and why what that person said or did was insulting, and put yourself in the other person's shoes. Why did they say that? Do they just not know better? Do they know nothing about your culture or your personal identity except for maybe something they read on Facebook or saw on TV? And that will help you identify how you want to address the situation, if you even want to address the situation. So these are some of the things that us as educators need to consider. One, these are considered aggressions, insults, or invalidations. Failing to learn to pronounce or continuing to mispronounce the names of students after they've corrected you. I have seen this over and over and over again. Please make sure you ask your students how they want to be referred to. They may have nicknames that they prefer, or maybe if you're saying their name wrong, they're going to be too afraid to say something to you. So consider having them spell it out for you phonetically, and make sure you show them that you're invested in calling them by their correct name. Please don't schedule tests and projects on religious or cultural holidays. As we go through this course, we discuss some really important holidays throughout our calendar that we may not be familiar with, and it's really important that you take that in consideration when you are assigning projects. Disregarding religious traditions or their details. For example, if you have a student who is fasting because of a religious holiday in your class, that's not a good day to bring in food or treats, or to do a food experiment or use food in your math class. So just keep that into consideration. Don't set low expectations for students from particular groups, neighborhoods, or feeder patterns. We will all be teaching at schools, and I know you've all heard about particular elementary schools and middle schools not being as academically challenging. I will tell you from my own experience, if you set the bar high and you let your students know that that bar is set high because you believe in them and you want them to be successful, and you scaffold your lessons to help them be successful, they will rise to the challenge. So do not think that just because your students are coming from particular schools or previous teachers that they themselves will not be prepared for your class. Don't call on, engage, and validate one gender, class, or race of students while ignoring other students during class. I see this a lot, and we discussed in our previous lecture ways that we can avoid that, like using the popsicle stick method, a random number generator, and you assign numbers to all your students, rolling a dice, and whoever's number one has to respond to the prompt. Those are all ways that you can avoid doing that. I just watched a student teacher that only called on white males in a particular corner of the classroom. And I just wanted to scream because there were so many brilliant students in this class. And the student didn't even realize what they were doing. So I recommend that you really check yourself when you're leading class discussions or you're doing some sort of responsive learning. Assigning students tasks or roles that reinforce particular gender roles or don't allow all students flexibility across roles and responses. Please do not make every single female student in your class the secretary for a class project. And do not make all the males in that class be the president of the class or the vice president of the class. Anticipating students' emotional responses based on gender, sexual orientation, race, or ethnicity. If you are reading The Kite Runner in class, or you are reading a book about Rosa Parks, don't assume that just because you have students of a particular race or sexual orientation that they're going to respond a particular way to that reading. Don't use inappropriate humor in class that degrades students from different groups. This can be difficult because humor in general can be degrading. So I try to be funny in class, but I also understand that there's a time and a place for humor. So consider that when you're making a joke. And a lot of times when teachers get in trouble, their immediate response was, I was just joking around. So consider the types of jokes that you are making in your class. Don't express racially charged political opinions in class, assuming that the targets of those opinions do not exist in your class. You do not know who is moderate, who is liberal, who is conservative, or whose parents voted for who. So please don't start getting into politics unless you are teaching something that actually involves politics. Don't use terms like illegal to reference undocumented students. We have a lot of things going on in our country right now with immigration and DACA. And these students are extremely anxious. Do not assume your students are illegal or undocumented, and do not use terms like illegal. Hosting debates in class that place students from groups who may represent a minority opinion in class in a difficult position. Do not ask for the Black perspective. Do not ask for the perspective of the only Jew, the only Muslim, the only Buddhist, the only Hispanic. Make sure that everyone is represented, but also don't single any individuals out. A few more. Expecting students of any particular group to represent the perspective of others, just don't do it. It's not worth it. And if someone wants to share their perspective, they will if you are creating a culturally inclusive classroom. Do not deny the experiences of students by questioning their credibility or validity of their stories. If they're telling you a personal story where they themselves have experienced microaggression or microassault, just listen and validate their feelings. And don't assign class projects or create classroom or school procedures that are heterosexist, sexist, racist, or promote other oppression, even inadvertently. If you are an elementary school teacher, make sure that everybody has the job of picking up after each other. Make sure everyone gets to be the line leader. Everybody gets to collect the pencils and pass them out. You don't want to continue the stereotypes that these students see every day. And please, please, please do not use sexist language. Consider who you're discussing in your classes and consider who you're discussing that with. If we were meeting in person, we would have a think, pair, share where we would discuss a time when we ourselves may have experienced a microaggression, or maybe we have accidentally said a microaggression. I do want you all to reflect and think about when you feel like you may have experienced a microaggression, but also think about those times where maybe we've said something really dumb and what we would do differently in the future so we can prevent that from happening again. Thank you guys for attending this lecture, and I hope you have a great week.